Hayom Yom Chamishi B'Shabbos. Today is Thursday. Today's Yud Adar. Today's Yud Adar. I'm sorry, Tes Adar. Now, Rabbi say, today is the day the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America in 1940, in Tov Shin. That means, what is it, 69 years ago, the Rebbe arrived in America. Or some would say we're going into the 70th year since the Frierdiker Rebbe came to the United States of America. In the year that Rebbe arrived, it was a leap year, it was an Iber Yar, and he came in Adar Sheni, the second Adar. In other words, he came a week before Purim. And the first real Fabrengen that he had was the Purim Dike Fabrengen. The story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's arrival, as I'm sure you all know, the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's arrival, in Das Tachten, on the surface of it, has to do with the war. The Rebbe did not want to come to America. He had been in the United States a decade before. He spent a whole year here. And he wrote in correspondence that he decided that he doesn't want to settle in America. He wants to remain in Europe. And as I've shared with you the point, the Rebbe said, I heard this from my Buket, Olav Shalom, whom I worked with. He was a senior Rosh Yeshiva and I was a young Shnuk. And he said that he heard then in Poland that the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Ich will sein a Rebbe über Chassidim. Ich will nicht sein a Rebbe über der Welt. I want to be a Rebbe over Chassidim. I don't want to be a Rebbe over the whole world. In other words, the Rebbe understood that coming to the United States means he's no longer a Rebbe over Chassidim, that the situation is going to force him to become a Rebbe über der Welt. And the Rebbe didn't want that. But the Eibishter did. And the Eibishter had durchgeführt. The Eibishter accomplished what he wished. Right? Like you have in Rashi and Chumash with Yankov Avinu. Yankov had to go into Golus. And if need be, he would go with shackles of iron, with chains. So the Eibishter made a whole Veistach. A whole long scheme on Ma'aseh Yosef at Tzaddik and a disappearance in 22 years. So the Yankov Avinu should come to Mitzrayim B'Chovid. The Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, stayed in Europe almost as long as he could. And he came here because of the war. That's the Das Tachten. Now we know from documents and from letters that about a year or a year and a half before the war began, the Rebbe revisited the thought of moving to America. Okay, the Rebbe was here in 1929, 1930. The Rebbe had left Russia, not really by choice. Also, it seems like he was pressured to leave. And he settled in Riga, Latvia, which was the country that had given him immigration, rights to immigrate. The Latvian government was instrumental in saving the Rebbe's life. Rebbe Mordechai Dubin, who was a Lubavitcher Chassid and a member of the political party of the SEM, of the House of Representatives in Latvia, had negotiated the Rebbe's release from Russia, from prison and from Russia. And the Rebbe was living in Riga. And for the next 6 years, the Rebbe's stationery reads temporary home. Temporary residence. The Rebbe traveled a lot and was constantly evaluating possibilities. He went to Israel. One of the reasons he went to Israel was to contemplate the possibility of settling there permanently. He was in America for the same reason. He was all over Western and Eastern Europe for the same reasons. And the decision ultimately was to move to Poland, which was Eastern European, which was old-fashioned, which was poor, because he wanted to be a Chassidish Rebbe, a Chabad Chassidish Rebbe. And being a Chabad Chassidish Rebbe meant he had to have a Chabad Chassidish environment. And the closest he could have had, Russia was out of the question. The closest he could have had at that time was Poland. As the war became closer, 1938, the war started September 1st, 1939. In 1938, the idea of moving to America was revisited. Reb Chatzke Fagin started writing letters, and papers were actually presented to the United States government about the possibility of the previous Rebbe emigrating to the United States. So when the war actually started and the Rebbe had to run and come here in a hurry, it was much easier for him to enter the United States because a lot of the groundwork had already been done. A lot of the preliminary paperwork had been done in anticipation of a peacetime emigration of the Rebbe to the United States. So when you look at it for face value, it almost seems like every event in the previous Rebbe's life was, so to speak, forced upon him. He left Lubavitch because of a war. He left Rostov because they were going to put him in jail. He left Leningrad in Russia because the government basically gave him no choice. He had to leave. And so forth. It seemed that there's a series of coercive events forcing the Rebbe to immigrate from place to place, to go from one country to the next country to the next country. The Rebbe spoke about this, that Golos Lubavitch was exiled 10 times. It's not exactly sure what the 10 are, but from Lubavitch till New York was Asara Golias, was 10 exiles, 10 Golias. But the previous Rebbe says in many Hasiche, the most notable, the most explicit, was said the day before he left Russia, which was the biggest move of his life. Simchas Teda, the previous Rebbe left Russia the day after Simchas Teda. Simchas Teda by Fabreng, hundreds and hundreds of Hasidim, possibly thousands of Hasidim, most of whom would never see the Rebbe again. This was their last goodbye. And it was an incredibly emotional weekend, Yom Tov Tishrei. Incredibly, incredibly emotional. And by that Fabreng, in the previous Rebbe made an announcement. And the announcement was, people think that my immigrating from Russia has to do with extraneous forces, with pressure, with governments, with religious restrictions, with threats, with few options. So you should know that all of that is untrue. Quote, say the Mesudar Yesh Kan, there's a clear order, there's a plan, there's a master plan. The Rebbe spoke a Sikha, which they have on the end of the video, America is nicht anders. They have this excerpt, these few minutes of the Rebbe speaking, where the Rebbe says, the previous Rebbe came to America and he makes an announcement. The announcement is that he came to the United States to prove as America is nicht anders. He came to the United States to establish that America is no different. Frierdiker Rebbe says that you can make in America the same kind of Yiddishkeit like you had in the old country. He came to America to prove as America is nicht anders. So the Rebbe says, come on. He came to America precisely because America is your anders. He came here because America gave people rights, freedom of religion, and it was not oppressive, and it was not abusive, and it certainly was not killing Jews. He came here because America is anders. So what does it mean? The Rebbe says that America, while America is nicht anders, to prove America is nicht anders. And of course the answer to that question is Bechlal in the lives of people. That's what the Rebbe says. And Alachas kama v'kama in the life of a Rebbe, Nasi b'Yisrael. There's mehavayim etzadegever keinanu. The steps of man are preordained by God. The way I've heard it said, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've heard, that what you do once you arrive is your choice. But where you go is predetermined. In other words, you come to a place, you have good things to do, you have to do them. But the choice of where to go, the Rebbe makes. So, whatever the explanations would be for how and why and what affected the Rebbe's departure from one place and his arrival in a new place, that's chitzonius, that's klipa, that's the periphery. The pnimius hadavar is, and this is how the previous Rebbe lived his life, he asked himself, what does the Eibishter want from me? And he did not want to come to America. And you read in his talks, in his siches, which are published, and I have to be honest, that most of those talks were not simply spoken, he actually wrote them himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe used to write his own siches. He could speak for 5 minutes and write 2 hours worth of material. Frierdiker Rebbe was the opposite of the Rebbe. The Rebbe used to speak at great length and write in tiny little sentences, but Frierdiker Rebbe verkehrt. He spoke very bekitzer. His articulation of thoughts was very concise, but when he wrote, it became a flower. This is different tchunis, different personalities, different so the previous Rebbe used to write his own siches in many cases, not always, but many times, and he referred to his coming to the United States as the Hashgacha Ha'elyono Shlichus, the mission from the divine hand. That's how he referred to it. And the connotation, the intent, in my understanding, is this is not my choice, this is God's. And because the Eibishter runs the world and runs my life, I must ask myself, what is God's message for me today? And when he came here, he made the adaptations, he made the changes that he felt the ones that needed to be made at the time and at the place to accommodate the continuation of Yiddishkeit in the United States of America. Ubulsheni HaKadosh, the holy words of the Rebbe, America is nicht anders. America is no different. This is the story. This is the story. The thing that's so powerful about the Frierdiker Rebbe's life, and really the only word to articulate it is taka, it's powerful, is his incredible adaptability, his ability to change, He moved from one world to another world to another world. And in each world, he recreated himself. He reinvented himself. B'chol Mahusay, there's a Sikha from Frierdiker Rebbe which is printed now in the Sikhas in Tafshin Vav Tafshin Yud, and you know how it goes. The book comes out, I read it, and you never have to hear about it. But the Frierdiker Rebbe says, I think it's 1947, but it's around that time. He says, imagine a Jew who's 60 years old, broken in body and in spirit, has to start his life again like a child. So the Rebbe said about himself, a Yid 60 Jahre alt, a 60-year-old man has to reset, restart, on him from the snai, a brand new life, like as if he never lived. Might as well walk straight up. I saw you. You didn't sneak in without being noticed.
I should have said to him, go. I said, all right, I'll go.
And he continued to recreate himself. In Russia, he was one kind of a Rebbe. Then in Russia itself, he changed. They're now finding the Maimorim from the Frierdiker Rebbe from the very early years. When the previous Rebbe became a Rebbe, he wants to be a good old Chabad Rebbe. Chassidus, Avodah, the Maimorim are incredible. They're finding now the essays that the Rebbe wrote in the early years, 1921, 1922, 23, long, deep, involved Haskalah of Chabad Chassidus. A few years later, the previous Rebbe was busy with Yiddishkeit, with Hashbar and with Mikveh Tareh and with Shchita and so forth. Then he leaves Russia, he moves to Western Europe, and he has to deal with one kind of Yiddishkeit. Then he moves to Eastern Europe, deals with a completely different kind of Yiddishkeit. And as the Rebbe used to say, V'kanu b'yachov, in Poland, the Rebbe suffered from jealousy. Had there not been a war, had there not been World War II, in a generation, all of Poland would have been Chabad Chassidim, at least the intelligent ones, the Kluge. And people were aware of that, and they were not happy about that prospect. Then he comes to America, a whole new situation. You know, Rabbi Edelman Zagazunzain from Springfield, Massachusetts, I brought in Yeshiva a few years ago. He says one of the first things the Frierdiker Rebbe did when he came to this country, just give you an idea. These are pieces of history that we don't even know anymore. He hired one of the best lawyers in the state of New York. And the Rebbe didn't have money to buy bread. One of the most expensive lawyers in the state of New York. To fight against the New York State Board of Education. To permit the 2 or 3 day schools that lived in New York City to teach Limud HaKodesh in the morning. We're not talking about not teaching English. We're just talking about teaching mathematics at 9 o'clock. Let alone learn mathematics at 1 o'clock. And he got together the few. There was not a lot of day schools. Chaim Berlin, I think, had a day school. Terev Das had a day school. And Lubavitch, maybe there was one more. There was a school called Teras Emes in the 30s. I don't know how long that lasted. And they worked together to accomplish what? The children should not come to school and in a fresh mind learn geography and physics and chemistry and biology and history and social sciences and whatever else. They should learn it in the afternoon. It was a war because the New York State Board of Education said we have to educate our students to be good citizens. You want to learn religion, it's your business, but this is America. This is what the Rebbe was busy with. This is what the Rebbe was busy with. And he continuously reinvented himself. And the thing that I want to share, and this is really, to some degree, a personal hergish. I'm not going to say it's entirely a personal hergish, because I think there's a lot of indications of this. I think there's a lot of proof for what I'm about to say. But nevertheless, this is a sense that I get. The previous Rebbe spent hours and hours and hours. You're talking about a Rebbe, right? Which means like this. He was a very smart man. Frierdiker Rebbe. You talk about intelligent, intelligent. I mean, these are barinish. These are not normal minds at all, An infinite mind, A cup, was can't go into Mishai as I investment a cup. A totally different kind of a mind. But he was an extreme, he was a pnimi. He was a very deep human being at the same time, which means he wasn't just smart, he was incredibly connected. Connected to himself, connected to the Eibishter, and connected to his people and to his world. And the Rebbe did incredible amounts of thinking to ask himself the simple question, what does the Eibishter want from me? So we have the good fortune of following. The Rebbe didn't have the good fortune of following, he had to create. Right? If this can be said, and maybe it shouldn't be said. Our Rebbe, the Rebbe's all Gesundsein, follow the lead of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe set an agenda, The Rebbe created it. The Rebbe hat das Mashakshe gewesen, Pereach gewesen, Yotzitz und Porach. The success of Lubavitch is the Rebbe, it's not the Friedrich Rebbe's. But the tone, the direction, the priority, the previous Rebbe set. I'm going to just tell you 2 little episodes, which are well known, which give you illustrations of this. They're saying Kaddish for a Jew named Rabbi Groner, who passed away in Melbourne, Australia last year in Dalal Tammuz. And the Stachmamish Chaval al da Abdin v'lo Mishtachchen. We're losing. Lubavitch lost Hillel Pevzin a year ago. The best. And we can't replace them. Itche Groners don't grow on trees. These were the Rebbe Shluchim. They were big people. They were very, very special Jews. Talmidei Chachamim, Chasidim, Yerei Elikim, and full of Mesiras Nefesh. These people are passing away. One passes away, another passes away. We don't realize what we're losing. You can't replace these. These are the Rebbe's giants. And they did incredible things over the course of their successful lives with the help of the Eibishter, with the brachas of the Rebbe. Yitzchak Groner was sitting at 770. Yitzchak Groner had an incredible mind. And he was a masmid. He sat and learned. And he was matzliach in learning. And he was one of the bachrim who would shmuas with the Ramash. He would talk to the Rebbe in learning. And of course, talking to the Rebbe in learning is a lot of fun because it's never hard. It's always easy because it's always on his fingertips. And evidently, the Rebbe liked him. And then the Friedrich Rebbe sent Rabbi Groner, he was a bacher still, on a shlichus to some place to make a yeshiva. Buffalo, Philadelphia, I don't know where. So the Rebbe, I'm sorry? That was his first shlichus. There were many shlichusim. Yeah, Providence, okay. No, by Providence you're here, so you're saying Providence, Mistam is Providence. And if it's not Providence, that's also Providence. And the Rebbe went into the Friedrich Rebbe and said to the Friedrich Rebbe, we have one young man was wächst a chassidische Rosh Yeshiva that can actually become a chassidische Rosh Yeshiva. Say a lamden, a true Talmid Chacham, at the same time a chassid. Shouldn't he be allowed to condition himself for that role? Shouldn't he be left alone? I mean, not everybody can be, there are certain exceptions to rules. The Friedrich Rebbe took kids, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, made them Rosh Yeshivas. The Rebbe proposed to the Friedrich Rebbe that Groner should be left alone. He said, is this not learning? And the Friedrich Rebbe said, no. This is the job that has to be done now, and no one is exempt. So this is where the Rebbe got his counsel from. This is the Ma'aseh Shahaya. This happened with the Rebbe went into the Friedrich Rebbe suggesting that maybe Efsher Nish. The Friedrich Rebbe said, nein, yo. And then, of course, there's the other story which they had in the Living Torah not long ago, where the Rebbe said this over to people. He came downstairs from the Friedrich Rebbe, and he asked the Friedrich Rebbe, he came downstairs with the Rebbe, he saw 2 Bachrim. He said, ich komm jetzt von Schwer, I'm coming now from Friedrich Rebbe, and I have to tell you what I just heard, what just happened. The Rebbe the Rebbe was not into keeping secrets. That's for other people. I call them the professional shushkers. The Rebbe had a pearl, a diamond, he immediately shared it. You know why? Because when he shared that pearl, he didn't get any poorer. He got only richer. So the Rebbe sees these 2 Bachrim, komm jetzt von Schwer, I'm coming now from Friedrich Rebbe. And he says, I asked the Friedrich Rebbe the following. He says, I sit in the Merkis. The Rebbe sat in the Merkis. All kinds of people come in. Amongst them, you have Yidden who are Machalei Shabbos. They're not religious. They don't keep Shabbos. They don't keep kosher. And there's an element of them who are not Tenekesh and Nishbu, who are not from out of ignorance. They're not from out of choice. And Apidin, according to Jewish law, somebody who's not from out of choice, you're not supposed to be very nice to. Torah doesn't say nice things about a Shana Upidish, a person who raised in a Chassidish home and a Frum home and went away, and especially if his going away is with a boys, with a disrespect and with a cynicism. You're not supposed to be makad of such a person. The Shulchan Aruch has very strong words about such people. So the Rebbe goes into the Friedrich Rebbe and says, the office is open, people walk in, and I'm nice to everybody. Maybe I shouldn't be so nice to everybody. This is what the Rebbe asked his Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe. So the Friedrich Rebbe gave him a mashal. And he told him like this. He said, the teva, the nature of parents is that there's always enough love for all of their children. There's no such thing as a parent who doesn't have enough love. You have one child, you love that child infinitely. I just can't find my phone. You have 2 children, So you love each child differently. You have 10 children, you love all of the 10 children differently. There's no such thing as a parent with not enough love. That's what Rebbe gesagt. Okay, maybe the hippies in America think otherwise because we're so busy loving ourselves. But I think the Rebbe gesagt, the Rebbe is gerecht. You have 10 kids, it's not the pshat you have to divide the love 10 ways. There's enough love for everybody. He says, and what happens if a parent has a child that's what they call today a special child? Nicht kein Gesundheit, he's unhealthy. He can't walk. He's missing a hand, he cannot see. That child gets from his parents a special love. So the Rebbe says, the Eibishter has enough love for all of his children. What about those children who cannot walk? That means to say they don't go to shul. Or they're missing a hand, translate the Rebbe, they don't put on tefillin. And he went through a series of examples. Or they cannot speak, doesn't learn Torah. He says, "Farazam kind have melten a spezielle Liebschaft." A dependent child, a compromised child, is a special love. So the Rebbe says, the Frierdiker Rebbe tells the Rebbe that this is how you have to treat people that the Shulchan Aruch says, Miridim v'lemayla. So the Rebbe, to a great degree, I mean, no one to say that the Rebbe did not invent something is ridiculous. The Rebbe took Bashar from Lubavitch, but the Frierdiker Rebbe set the tone. Who set the Frierdiker Rebbe's tone? He did. The Frierdiker Rebbe was a Rebbe, but he was also the son of a Rebbe and the chassid of a Rebbe. And he was given a shlichus by his Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab wrote a will, which is printed in part, in which he instructs the Frierdiker Rebbe as to what he wants him to do. Well, guess what? He didn't do it. Because he couldn't. Because the Eibishter had other plans. The tzavah that the Frierdiker Rebbe said explicitly, the purpose which I was created for, I have not been able to do. Why? Because you have to save Jewish children from Shmad. So this is the thing about the Frierdiker Rebbe that's so, like I said to you before, it's such a powerful thing to contemplate. The Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, he didn't create Chabad over again. Chabad is the Eibishter's. But he recreated his purpose. And in a little bit, this is my imagination, and a little bit you could read it in the Sichos and the Mechtavim. The Rebbe spent so much time thinking. People used to ask the Frierdiker Rebbe questions. And he would say, I'm still thinking about it. And I'm still thinking about it, could be for 5-6 years. And when the Frierdiker Rebbe says, I'm still thinking about it, and 6 years later he gives you an answer, it's not the pshat. He put it down on a piece of paper and he forgot it. And 6 years later he found the piece of paper. He thought about it for 5 minutes, made a decision. He thought about it for 6 years. The Frierdiker Rebbe spent years deciding where he wanted to live. Years. Until he decided to settle in Poland. And a few years later, the Eibishter schlepped him out of Poland, brought him to America. This is the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. And the pnimius of it, in other words, the part of the story that's negir to us, as it's explained in the Beis Rabbeinu Shabbavel Sicha, the Sicha that the Rebbe gave out in Tafshin and Beis, is that when the previous Rebbe said in 1927, Seder Mesuda Yeshkan, there's a 1928, 1920, no, 1927, Seder Mesuda Yeshkan, there's a master plan. And when his father said a decade before, in 1915, as he sat in the wagon, leaving the city of Lubavitch, and the official plan was that it's a temporary leave. The Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch because of the war. The Rebbe Rashab hated the Germans. He hated Wilhelm, just like the Alter Rebbe hated Napoleon. He saw him as the embodiment of Klippa itself. There's a lot of stories about that. And when the Germans advanced eastward into Russia, the Rebbe left because he didn't want to be under the German occupation. Although the Germans were pretty good to the Jews, as long as they didn't live in border cities, the yeshiva stayed behind. The Bacham continued learning for 2 more years in Temchat Mimim. But the Rebbe did not want to be under German occupation. The plan was that he's going to come back. That was the plan. Yet he got into the wagon and he sits down and he says, 102 Jahre Lubavitch gewesen die Ira Bira von Chassidus. For 102 years, Lubavitch was the capital of Chassidus. And now it's going into Golus. In other words, he understood plans, schmans. This is a one-way trip. He's not coming back to Lubavitch. And his not coming back to Lubavitch was not, in his mind, a technical thing. It was not, in his mind, something that had to do with circumstance, but something that had to do with destiny. with the Ratzon Ha'elyon, with what the Eibishter wants. Right, 1915 is how many years ago? 94 years ago, right? That's almost 100 years. And during this time, the world has changed incredibly. And the face of the Jewish world has changed even more. What's happened to Jews in the last 100 years, or whatever it is, it's unbelievable. Not just Sfardim, not just Ashkenazim, but in the second half of this century, Sfardim as well. Sfardim have been uprooted. I saw a number, 550,000. Social scientist, I think there's a lot more than 550,000 Sfardim that lived in Arab countries that have been uprooted by the establishment of the State of Israel. That sounds like a low number. But incredible numbers. Hundreds of thousands of Jews of Sfarad who lived in their native lands for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years had to move because the modern State of Israel created new hatred. So there's been an incredible shift, and hidden underneath all of this upheaval and all of this turmoil and all of this chaos and all of this lack of continuity is Mashiach Tzidkenu. That's how the Rebbeim see it. That's how the Rebbeim understand what's going on. And if you had to put it into a form that the Nefesh HaBahamis could agree with, it's what the Gemara says. Everybody knows this Gemara. The Gemara says that before Mashiach comes, there's a process of tshuva. This is us. We are the time of tshuva. Now, does tshuva mean you have to first become not religious to do tshuva? I think, Baruch Hashem, in today's day and age, you can be 100% frum, and somehow you have a lot to do tshuva for. We are a tshuva generation, a returning generation to the Eibishter. And the Rambam brings down the famous Rambam the Rebbe used to say with so much emotion, as ifticha teira, as Yisrael b'seif galus soneisin tshuva u'miyad hein negolen. The Torah gave a promise and a guarantee that the Yidden are going to do tshuva, u'miyad hein negolen. They will be redeemed immediately. Mashiach will come right away. This is the world we live in. This is the time. This is the confusion. This is the upheaval. This is the lack of clarity. That is our world, and somehow it's our responsibility to do something personally, and in terms of our ability to influence other people, in terms of bringing the world to tshuva and bringing the world towards Mashiach Tzidkenu. And as I mentioned to you on many previous occasions, in 1967, there was the war in Eretz Yisrael, the 6-Day War. The following Tishrei, which was still 1967, the Rebbe spoke two Maimorim with the same day but Amaschal. That when Mashiach comes, Yidden are going to do tshuva. They're going to come from Ashur, and they come from Mitzrayim, they come from Assyria, and they're going to come from Egypt. And the Maimonides Hasidus explain that Ashur means Golos of Ashirus, Assyria means a Golos of wealth, and Mitzrayim means a Golos of poverty. Egypt means a Golos of poverty. All kinds of Jews with all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of explanations and bases come back and do tshuva. And after the 6-Day War, the Rebbe started a tshuva campaign. He almost, maybe not almost, he announced that it's the Khan at Tkufa. This is now is the time for tshuva. This is 1967. It's a time for tshuva. And like everything else that the Rebbe did, he didn't just tell other people to do it, he did it himself. And the way it expressed itself in the Rebbe, Kamuvan, V'gam Poshet, the Ikir was Yechidus and Shlichus. The Rebbe spent thousands and thousands and thousands of hours personally, bring people back to do tshuva and to come closer to the Eibishter. And this we all know. But in addition to that, one of the things that the Rebbe did after the 6-Day War was he started a series of discussions on the Alter Rebbe's Igeres HaTshuva for the next 3 years and some. Every Fabrengen, the Rebbe spoke on the Igeres HaTshuva. In other words, just like the Rebbe spoke always on Rashi, the Rebbe spoke on Igeres HaTshuva. And B'das Tachten, the explanation for why he did this is because he announced that now is a tkufa of tshuva. This is a time for tshuva. So this is the story. The underlying point is Amahalt Otot by the coming from the Gals Malach HaMashiach. And the way to prepare ourselves for Mashiach is to do a little bit better tshuva. Let me tell you a story. And the reason I'm telling you the story is because I really did not plan to spend 45 minutes or 40 minutes on this topic. I wanted to learn Maimir, but the Maimir is going to have to wait. But let me tell you this story. This story is the first Sicha from the Frierdiker Rebbe Sichas that's printed. Tav Reish Pei, 1920, the Rebbe Rashab passed away, the Frierdiker Rebbe becomes a Rebbe. But the Rebbe Rashab passed away Beis Nisan, the second day of Nisan. And gerade the Histalkus of the Rebbe Nishma Satan has a very, very strong connection to Purim. The whole Arich is the famous Ma'aser with Purim, and it's just going Mamalek. The story of the Rebbe Rashab's passing is an incredible story. It's a haunting story. It's a hallow story. But that Tishrei, 6 months before the Rebbe Rashab passed away, there was a Fabrengen of the Frierdiker Rebbe with the Bachrim. Tmimim. At that time, the previous Rebbe was not the Rebbe. He was the Rebbe's Zun. He was the son of the Rebbe. Naturally, everybody treated him with great respect. But the relationship was quite different. He was not the Rebbe. He was the son of the Rebbe. Leizer Nanes, I told this to you many times. Leizer Nanes writes in his biography that, his autobiography, he writes that he went into the Rebbe in 1966. And he said to the Rebbe, I want to relocate to America. Now in 1966, Leizer Nanes was about 70. Now 70 is old. He spent 20 years in the gulags. 70 was ancient for him. And how was he supposed to know he's going to live till 100? I mean, he didn't have he doesn't come with a ticket that says 30 more years. He figures 2, 3, 4 years his machine's going to break down, finished. He was separated from his wife for 20 years. He had no children. When you're in jail, you can't have children. And so he wanted to be by the Rebbe. So he comes to the Rebbe, and he tells the Rebbe he wants to relocate to New York. Now the Rebbe had told him, I don't know if before or after, that the 20 years he spent in jail don't count. That's why he lived till 99. He lived until the 100th year. Take off 20, he lived only 80, you understand? Not actually. The 20 years he spent in the gulags, in the labor camps, the Rebbe told him they don't count. They're not part of his biological cheshbon. So, but he is now around, let's say he's 68, 69, 70. He doesn't think he's got a long time to go. Where's the better place to die than in the Rebbe's Dal Damas? He didn't come here to die. He came to Oislev the Yodin to live. Now, of course, the Rebbe knows the story. The Rebbe wanted him in Israel, and the Rebbe wanted him involved in the variety of moistus. The Rebbe appreciated Leizer Nanes as soon as he arrived. And the Rebbe gave him responsibilities. And the Rebbe wanted him involved in the moistus. The Rebbe trusted him, even though he was a recent arrival, and the moistus had been, some moistus were 20 years old. The Rebbe wanted him involved in everything. The Rebbe, when he died, when he passed away, the Rebbe Zelik Slonim Alav Shalom, who ran the Kol Chabad by himself, the Rebbe made a committee to run Kol Chabad, and one of the members of that committee was this same Leizer Nanes. So he says, I went into the Rebbe, the Rebbe Leizer Nanes says, and they told the Rebbe, I want to relocate to the United States. So the Rebbe told me he wants me to live in Eretz Yisrael, because he wants me to do kach v'kach. So he said to the Rebbe, I said 20 years in the gulag. I'm an old and defeated, broken man. I want to be near the Rebbe. So the Rebbe answered me, he says, a soldat geht wo meshiktem. A soldier goes where he's sent, not where it's convenient for him. But Leizer Nanes adds a few words which are a window into our Rabbeim. He says, I never heard a Rebbe talk with such force since I heard the Rayatz Fabreng B'chaya von Rashab. Those are his words. I never heard such power from a Rebbe, such force from a Rebbe, since I heard the previous Rebbe Fabreng before he became Rebbe. B'chaya von Taten. You get the picture. When the Rebbe Rashab, when it was alive, was B'chaim Chasman, and Frierdiker Rebbe was not the Rebbe, he could afford to lay it on. The Frierdiker Rebbe's Fabrengens were fire. The Frierdiker Rebbe, he was pushed. It was the expression they used, sakod. It was so hard to listen to him because the demands and the bittel was, you felt like a shmata by his Fabrengens, because he spoke about himself like a shmata. They were so strong, they were so demanding, they were so urgent. The idea that Mesiras Nefesh is our bread and butter was in every word. When the Frierdiker Rebbe became a Rebbe, there was a mask. At the Chanosim Yisrael, words, a Rebbe, once he's Ela Al-Kasan Asiyas, some words can't come out of his mouth, because whatever he says happens. It's the same person. It's a different chair, it's a different position. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe became a Rebbe, Kvayochel, he was muffled. So Lezer Nana said, the Rebbe spoke to me in that Yechidus. I hadn't heard a Rebbe talk like that since I heard the Frierdiker Rebbe talk before he was a Rebbe. So this is the Fabrengens. The Rebbe used to make Fabrengens, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he would invite only Eltere Bachrim. It was very exclusive. And of course, somebody would find out and everybody would sneak in through the windows. There's nothing new in Lubavitch. And he told them the following episode. The following episode. I'll tell you a story as Hakdama to the story. That the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe were in Germany. Würzburg, perhaps. In 1906, 1905, 1906. And in Würzburg at that time, or whatever city it was, it just was not Berlin, I don't know what it was. There was an exclusive park. It was a privately owned park that was accessible only to members of the royal family and maybe the nobility. And you had to have special passes to get in. And it obviously was gorgeous. And many of the members of the royal family and the nobility had cottages, private little estates within this park. The previous Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab were there, and they were standing by the gates of this park, and the Rebbe Rashab says to Frierdiker Rebbe, I really would love access to this park, right? So for a hefty bribe, the guard allowed them in, and in fact gave them a tour, and accompanied them. And they walked around the park, and he showed them the different attractions, and he showed them the different cottages, and he told them who owns what. And they came to a particular cottage, and this is the Kaiser's cottage. So the Rebbe Rashab says to Frierdiker Rebbe, ich will sehr reingehen. I really want to go in. So for another bribe, he opened up the door and let him in. The Rebbe Rashab walked into Kaiser Wilhelm's study. He sat down on Wilhelm's seat. He took Wilhelm's quill and ink and stationery, and he wrote on my Chassidus. But before he started writing, he sat down and he said, a Klugenstuhl, a wise chair, smart chair. Wilhelm wasn't stupid, he was just evil. There's a difference. A smart chair. I think there was another expression, a Klugenstuhl. Maybe there was another Eisprach, but a very interesting Eisprach. The Rebbe Rashab saw Wilhelm as a powerful force. Then he wrote the Maimer, and he took it with him. This Maimer, the Rebbe Rashab kept in a portfolio. He had one of those, those leather-bound, leather things with a zipper. The Frierdiker Rebbe never saw that Maimer. A very short while before the Rebbe Rashab passes away, he opens up the portfolio, pulls out the page, and it has Wilhelm stationery on it. And he says to Frierdiker Rebbe, Gedenkst? Remember? And the Rebbe says yes. And the Rebbe Rashab strikes a match and burns it. And the Rebbe Rayat says, I said, Tate, I said, what are you, I was like, my first reaction was, how could you do it? And then I realized my father could do whatever he wants, So the Frierdiker Rebbe describes this to the Rebbe into the Shemis. I said, Tate. And then I realized to whom I'm talking. In other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe never read that piece of paper. He doesn't know what's on it. But now the second story. And the second story is in the Sikha of Tafresh Pei, that Wilhelm was destined to speak, was scheduled to speak at an event where thousands of Germans were gathered. And the Rebbe Rashab says, let's go. They went from their hotel to this outdoor place. And they stood at the back, thousands and thousands of Germans, and two Eastern Europeans. I mean, they were obviously Jews, but East and West Europe was not only separated by Jews and non-Jews. It was a whole different culture, a whole different dress. Wilhelm was on the stage, and in a matter of seconds or minutes, he spotted them in this massive crowd. Wilhelm. And he turns to one of his advisors and he says something, and they both laugh. Within 5 minutes, they were asked to leave before the Kaiser would speak. Wilhelm wanted them to go away before he spoke. And when the Rebbe walked away, he said to his son, he's already made plans for a complete war. This is almost 10 years before the war, 8 years before World War I. And the Rebbe saw him, he saw Mamish as another Napoleon. And he was another Napoleon. And the effect that he had on the world was Napoleonic. He changed the world. He secularized the world. That verfreit de Welt. It's a daf von Tshuva bringen Mashiach. Okay.